Hello again, and welcome to another episode of The Rare Agent, where we peel back the curtain on all things real estate. Today, we have with us Sahil Jaggi, a top 1% realtor with over $350 million worth of real estate sold. He also has an amazing portfolio of over $25 million in real estate, over 17 doors. Welcome, Sahil. I am so excited to have you on our podcast today.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
For
You're
sure.
welcome.
Amazing.
So we
Thanks for
know
having
that you are incredibly multifaceted. So we're going to take a quick rewind. Where did it all start for you? How did you find real estate? What's your journey like?
Yeah, so I actually am generation immigrant, came to the country in 2003, went straight to school. I went to Laurier for economics and business. And at the time, I guess the dream was to get into finance. It was early 2000s. That was the thing to do, right? Become an investment banker. Even though I didn't know much about investment banking or finance, that seemed like the right fit. So I studied finance, finished my graduation, and actually got a dream job in New York.
Wow.
I started doing investment banking on Wall Street. And anybody who's coming out of school will tell you, like, that's where you want to be and that's it, right? But year and a half into it, didn't resonate with me at all. So I was like, that wasn't my calling. I missed Toronto too much. And especially moving into Canada and then doing it all over again into another country, I just didn't have the bandwidth for it. So I kind of missed my friends and whatever group I had like sort of connected with in Toronto. So I came back, didn't want to be in banking anymore. And at the time the idea was to essentially get a job that you don't wear a suit and you wanted to be in sales,
Gotcha.
right? So I took up a job with corporate sales with Nestle, which is, Young and Shepherd. And I was doing sales for the confectionery business. And while I was doing that, I sort of started looking for a property for myself for all the savings I had done in investment banking. And it sort of made sense. Like when I started looking at condos, houses, I felt like that interest just generated out of nowhere, right? And I started getting into it. I'm like, well, this valuation doesn't make sense. That valuation doesn't make sense. And my brain just sort of went in that direction while I was working for Nestle.
Mm.
So, real estate investments, as an investor, I started in 2010. That was my first purchase that I made for a very tiny bungalow in Yonge and Shepherd. It's a street called Churchill. It was a 50-foot lot. And from the math, it made sense for me to like sort of move into the basement, rent out the main portion of the house, and sort of house hacking is what they call it now, right?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a term for it back in the day, but mathematically it made sense. I'm like, let somebody else pay your mortgage. So I came up with a 20%, paid it, moved into the basement, let somebody on the main floor pay my mortgage, and I was continuing working for Nestle, but my interest sort of kept going spiral into real estate.
Mm-hmm.
So 2010 is how I started as an investor. 4 years fast forward, had now gotten into 4 to 5 properties through joint ventures and essentially the equity growth that I gained out of that first property.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2014, I got my license for 2 reasons. One, I wasn't getting the right support from the agents on the other side. So if I was hiring an agent to do a job for me, I felt like I was doing the job better and I was doing the valuations and a lot of the comparables and everything myself. And second, I wanted to get more tools. I wanted to get access to this so-called MLS because back in the day, we didn't
Mm.
have sold data and everything else, right? So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to get my license, do this myself, continue my journey as an investor. Also, I started seeing a lot of my friends and people coming up to me like, oh, you're growing a good portfolio. Can you help us as well? So
Mm-hmm.
it sort of was like a very natural transition for me to just get my license in 2014.
Makes
And
sense.
that's how I started as an agent.
That's awesome. So as you began your career as a real estate agent, were you primarily investor focused or were you looking to sell primary residences? What was your vision for your real estate journey there?
Yeah. So in the beginning, very, very focused with investors,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I still am actually. 80% of the clients that I work with, even today, are all investors. People who are in the real estate market to find properties that cash flow, passive income, people who are looking to buy portfolios. But at the same time, I feel like any house that you're buying, whether it is for investor or let's say if you're going and buying a home for yourself, in Canada, if you look at it this, like a person starts with a 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, small house, big house, and then eventually downsizes.
Mm-hmm.
So if your first move in real estate is incorrect, it can really limit your options to upgrade later.
Definitely.
So inevitably by logic, I feel like your investment background and knowledge will come in handy, even from like helping the end users, right? So the circle grew, the leads grew, and referrals grew.
Mm.
But it started with investors, and it still focuses as an investor. But I definitely am a lot more hands-on with like people who are looking for houses for themselves. But try to stay focused in that luxury home or investor market,
Mm-hmm.
and then whatever spin-offs come off from it, I either refer it out to agents or if it's within the periphery of like, within the bandwidth of me doing it, then I'll take it on myself.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you've obviously built a very large business and done very well for yourself as a real estate agent before we get into all the other fun things you do. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you built that business and that database and those referrals and how you really grew?
Sure. So again, I think my biggest strength and my biggest attraction for people to come to me from day one has been the fact that he is a successful investor.
Mm.
I think that upfront credibility has always really worked in my benefit,
Mhm.
right? So it doesn't take me much to sit and sell myself to a lot of person because I can very easily just show the background and say that, look, I've done this for myself. I put my money where my mouth is. I'm not just a seller of real estate, I'm a buyer of real estate. If you're not buying properties like this, I am buying it for myself.
Mhm.
So that gives that comfort to the person sitting across from you that he's not just a phony baloney and he's not just doing it. He's actually putting his back into like, a lot of the investments that he's proposing for you to buy.
Mhm.
So that was sort of like the sales pitch that I always used to sort of like get people to like have confidence in me to work, right? But because I don't have much family and friends in this country as I started, I had to build a network of leads from the very bottom, right?
Mhm.
So I always liked the idea of farming. I always liked the idea of focusing in a certain neighborhood because I feel like, it's better to be a larger fish in a small pond.
Right.
I think that strategy even today is very important for anybody starting out. So I started farming North York, which is where I was buying a lot of my own investments. So I
Okay.
owned a lot of property in Willowdale. I was starting to like, door knock Willowdale where I
Mhm.
started. And it kind of went hand in hand because the focus was that let's say if I had a buyer or two, the idea was not just to throw stuff on MLS to him. Be like,
Mhm.
here's available properties, pick one.
Mhm.
For me, it was like, what are you looking for? Create a strategy for him and then actually start door knocking similar properties that he was looking for.
Right.
So I started double ending a lot of those deals and started getting a lot of listings. If he didn't want it, I sold it as a listing.
Mm.
If my buyers wanted it, I would just connect them and it would just be a double end. So door knocking was one of my favorite lead generations and also gave me a lot of insight about the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it was, again, two birds in one stone because I was learning the area more and more as an investor as I grew my portfolio.
Mhm.
But at the same time, taking that knowledge, helping my clients also move into the neighborhood and buy investment properties in the same neighborhood. So I think it kind of went hand in hand. And again, referrals, if you do good work, if you're
Mhm.
doing work that is actually giving you really good results, then referrals just come inevitably, right?
Mhm.
Sure.
And market obviously helped. Real estate 2014 to 2017, which was sort of like my early days of selling real estate, was very hot, right?
Mhm.
So if you were doing good work and if you're doing referrals and if you had a great portfolio to back it up with and a background to back it up with, that all just combined into like an explosion post 2017,
Right.
Mhm.
right? So 2014, I was Remax 30 under 30 is my first year in real estate. And I
Wow.
was like, 140-ish in real estate. And then, I always really enjoyed it, right? So after banking and after Nestle, it was more like, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do, right? So I was doing something that I loved. I was good at it. And I was willing to put a lot of my time and work and hard work into it.
Mhm.
And results just flew in.
So I have to ask, if a new agent comes to you and they're like, where do I start? I want to be you. I want to do what you've done. What's one tip you'd give them to build their real estate business?
So I can give a lot of tips. Question is, will they listen?
Mm.
Because I feel like it's everybody just thinks that I think social media is the way to do it,
Mm.
Mhm.
right? Let's just go and start posing yourself as the expert the day after you get your OREA license with no backing of buying real estate in the back. I think you have to step away from that. I think real estate, even today, I know AI is coming in, I know social media is coming in, but I'm still very conservative in terms of like, and traditional
Mm.
in terms of like how agents should start. And I have a lot of agents who intern with me and then they go off on their own and whatnot. But my number one advice is roll up your sleeves and get on the streets and learn real estate
Mhm.
first, right? I think before they jump into learning marketing and social media, it's important to learn real estate, right? Listen, and there's so much availability of like, podcasts such as yourselves, books, and different ways where you can learn real estate. Then experience real estate,
Mhm.
which is door knock, talk to people, attend networking events. If you can, absolutely start buying real estate as well, because then you become sort of like
An
an
expert.
endorser
Yeah.
of real estate yourself because I
And
still
you know how to deal with people going through the process because you've gone through it yourself.
exactly imagine going to, again, you're going to buy a car and you're going to go into a Honda showroom and a sales guy is selling you a car and he doesn't own a Honda himself. I want a person who's driven a Honda himself.
Mhm.
So I always ask when I'm going and buying something, are you a buyer of this product yourself? Because it's not that it will make them biased, but at least it will give them the ability to tell you the pros and cons of that product.
Yeah. How they've actually used it and know how it feels after a week, 2 weeks,
Exactly.
6 months.
So
Exactly.
as a newcomer, I think it's so important for you to learn the basics of real estate because OREA courses, let's be honest, is not producing geniuses in real estate, right?
No.
You have to experience real estate from the ground up. You have to spend a lot of time on reports, spend a lot of time on understanding market trends, and then become a person who has the confidence that if you do capture that lead and you're sitting across that person, you can give that amazing value to that person. And once you give that kind of value to people, it will come back in referrals. That's it, right? So I don't know if that was a very linear advice that I just gave,
I
but
think that
it's
was
a lot
very
in
good
one.
advice.
But yes, so spend a lot of time learning real estate and don't focus too much on marketing yourself upfront. First, become the person you can sort of actually give value.
For sure.
So jumping off of that, and to touch on something that you had said earlier, you and a lot of investors started their investing journey pre-COVID, right?
Mhm.
2014, 2017, and the macroeconomics have changed since then. So I feel not to discredit you whatsoever, because I think you've done brilliantly. But the market itself in those years it's kind of like if you did one thing, you could make a mistake and the real estate market would correct it for you and you come out, doing brilliantly. Considering how much the market has changed, what are you looking at now in today's climate for investors?
You mentioned
Considering
cash flow. Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
where are you taking people to get cash flow right now?
So there's two types of investors in the market, right? One is a person who is investing for passive income and for cash flow.
Mhm.
The number two is the person who is investing in assets for equity growth. That equity growth is measured with loan to value, which is essentially you buy a property with 20% down and 80% your loan. And eventually you want that property to become 50-50 LTV, refinance it back to 65 and then go on. I have always focused on as an equity investor, which is equity growth. And I sell that to a lot of people in the growth phase of their investor journey, right?
Mhm.
I think to expect passive income and cash flow right off the bat in Toronto, and you must have heard this from other professionals and in your podcast, or there is no such thing as
Yeah, like
20% down
everybody
and you are
says.
going to start making so much money, you're going to start paying your bills in this inflationary market.
Mhm.
So question is, you start early and you focus on buying properties that will give you enough equity growth. Eventually, you will have multiple properties with low loan to value, which will then convert into passive income over the span of 5 to 10 years.
Mhm.
If you want that realistic formula, then yes, Toronto is a very good place to start.
Mhm.
If your only focus is, I want cash flow from day one, which we're talking about 300, 500, maybe $1,000, then you have to step a lot further away from Toronto, right?
Mhm.
You may go to Windsor, you may go to the other market, but the downside of those markets is that then your risk and your security is not there.
Mm.
I refuse to compromise on security and I like to minimize risk when I purchase. And that comes with that baseline of location, which I think that if you're in the core and if you're in Toronto, it gives you a lot better risk aversion,
Mhm.
right? If you're buying your properties 15 to 20 minutes from downtown, if you're buying your properties within 30 minutes of very centralized locations, there's very little chance that, and you're picking your asset classes such as old homes, detached houses, freehold properties, your asset selection is very good.
Mhm.
Then I think that equity growth will come as the city is growing.
Mhm.
Yes, in 2010, when I started, market was fantastic. You could be flying on a plane, throw a dart, everything's increased, right?
Mhm.
But the speed at which my portfolio and my investors has increased, that's what matters. And I'll tell you how I calculate that.
Please do.
So
Mhm.
2010 to 2000 and let's say 18, in those 8 years, let's say if the market has increased at 8 to 12% on an average,
Mhm.
my properties, and I keep a tab of all this in Excel sheets, the properties that I have sold and purchased for myself have beaten that 8 to 12% by 14%.
Mm.
So you don't see yourself as a good investor if you're just moving with the market. Because then you're just an average person who happened to go and use the timing to their advantage and buy something really good. How much have you beaten the market appreciation by is what tells you whether or not how much are you successful as a good investor.
Mhm.
if you keep those same fundamentals strong and if you asset selection is still very good, even today, that means by logic, even if the market is not increasing by 8 to 10%, it's increasing by 3 to 4%, you're still beating the market with double-digit figures. And that happens with extreme due diligence, extreme understanding of saturated markets versus unsaturated markets, pre-construction versus freehold dumps that you buy in very good location, condos downtown versus houses 20 minutes from downtown Toronto. And that's where that asset selection comes. So when I sit down with an investor and I talk to them about their long-term goals, and I don't hear cash flow being as their primary focus today, but eventually turn that into passive income, I will first say it's not just important to take that 3, 4, 500 bucks and put it in your pocket, because that's not going to make or break or make you rich or poor.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to really add that wealth is if you select your assets in a way where you're focusing on equity growth, but at the same time, you're minimizing your risk in unstable markets like we are dealing with today.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't panicked when COVID happened. I haven't panicked when 2017 interest rates went up. And I'm not panicking today because my assets are not depreciating at all.
Mm-hmm.
My assets are those assets which are extremely low in supply in a city where we know that supply and demand is very imbalanced right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at further out of this pool of asset class where obviously there's housing supply, but out of this pool of asset classes, which assets cannot be produced more? Like you're not going to go and see more 50-foot lots being added to Toronto, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm buying properties that are currently low in supply. They cannot be increased in supply at all. And I'm trying to buy those properties. And then how I create and maximize cash flow is you buy a property which is single family and you turn them into duplexes and triplexes to manage strong cash flows.
Mm-hmm.
So as interest rates come down, your cash flows start going up. And over time of 5 to 10 years, when your LTV is very low, you start seeing amazing cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting to see amazing cash flow in my $25 million portfolio, which is sitting at $10 million in loan, $15 million in value, right?
Amazing.
So that has given me that ability to now start taking that $3,000, $4,000 a month from properties.
Are you helping people buy pre-construction?
No, because,
What are your thoughts on that?
well, I have very strong thoughts on that.
Oh, I'd love to hear that.
And it might, so I think the pre-construction is not a good buy currently, and it hasn't been a good buy, not just from the standpoint that I think builders are very smart. They know how to market products. They know how to hire agents to further their sales. I think they are in a position where it's very difficult for them to lose money because they take their deposits up front and at 20%. And their valuations on their condos are obviously high.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that people are misguided in pre-construction market at all with very little regulations. In fact, no regulations, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is nobody regulating pre-construction market. The government is not really saying that, look, there's very little consumer protection in those contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them don't allow you to assign. Some of them require you to go and take permission to assign, which depending on
In this
how-
market, we're really hearing more and more about how those contracts are pretty faulty.
Yeah, and I don't like-
and don't protect the consumer.
Exactly. And I
Mhm.
think there's a huge imbalance in terms of like how people are purchasing pre-construction. I think there's not enough knowledge about, okay, what am I signing? What are these documents? I know that there's 10 days of lawyer's cool-off period, but I think it's the hype that makes all the people very interested in buying. And putting that problem on the shelf for 4 years and I don't have to worry about a mortgage, I don't think it's a smart idea.
Mhm.
I think the fact that you're speculating so much in 4 years that the market will continue to increase and there's absolutely no way the market will decrease, which by the way is a lot of the sales pitches from a lot of people. Look at
Mhm.
Toronto, market will keep going up. You'll make a lot of money. Worst case, you assign it. What's
Mhm.
happening to all those people today?
Well, one of the best lines is, if you don't buy it now, it's going to be more expensive in the next phase. And then it's like, but how?
Says who? Yeah,
How?
like it's just because of the last 10 years trend. You can't bank on
Mhm.
that in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Right? Like you said, it's definitely helped me to rapidly increase my portfolio. But if I was, and yes, some people have made really good money in pre-construction, but look at the fundamentals of pre-construction. You're buying properties at a very high rate. There is absolutely no exit strategy at all. What happens if unexpected things like COVID happened, unexpected things like inflation happened? What if the wrong government is still in power, making this very different? What if the taxation laws are different? How can you speculate all that information and put it aside for the next 4 years, expect the appraisals to come equal or better, have the mortgage approvals in your hand, maybe you won't get the mortgage approval. How are you going to make up for the cash then? Right? So I think there's a lot of risk in pre-construction. I think the way it's being marketed is very wrong. I think the people who are selling it is, I don't know, I don't want to say it, but there's a lot of incentives on the table for agents to sell that,
For sure.
right? Some of them are getting 4%, 5%, as opposed to running around the city doing a lot of work to sell a house to make 2.5%.
Definitely.
So it's easy sell. And you're sitting down showing a bunch of floor plans, then telling them that out of these 8, 6 you don't get to buy, but these 2 you have to buy. And I think you should buy because the market will go up, which is technically the only sales pitch. So I don't agree with it. I don't like the fundamentals. As an investor, I would never touch pre-construction. But if somebody is absolutely gung-ho on it, what I would just do is be extra selective. Make sure at least you've mitigated some of that risk by reviewing your contracts properly, cap your development fees, get it reviewed by a proper lawyer with an exit strategy of assignment allowed with a fee, sure. And keep that cash aside just so that if things change in 4 years, you're still able to close, which I think nobody cares about, right? And yes, they added the mortgage pre-approvals and all that letters, but everybody can get pre-approval mortgage letters. So
I'd love to jump off that just quickly because you are obviously a seasoned, very sophisticated investor. And I think nowadays with the rise of social media, there's a lot of gurus and there's a lot of like, you're going to get rich quick if you invest in real estate, millions of dollars right away. What do you say to all those people that are just looking to make a buck quickly?
well, again, I think COVID, selling sunset, a lot of different things have changed the perception on social media,
Yeah.
right? I don't even know if people who are selling real estate, are they chasing leads? Are they chasing followers? What exactly are you looking to do in social media? I think your content needs to be it needs to have extreme value delivery, right? So I try to focus on my social media with extreme value delivery to people, because that way you're not only going to get the attention, but you're going to get the right attention. And by that right attention, meaning you are hitting the target market for people to come to you and actually convert those into relationships, actually convert those into leads, and then eventually deals. And those deals into referrals because there is a success strategy attached to it, right?
For sure.
So for me, social media is very simple. It's a lead generating platform. I'm not silly enough to ignore that part, right? So of course, I've invested in a full-time videographer. I am active on social media, but I try every single post to make sure what is the person who's looking on the other side, what kind of value are they getting? And am I attracting the right followers, not the number of followers? And if you focus on that in social media and you have the right intention behind your posts and your content, you will get amazing leads on social media. It's a free channel to get leads. And I generate 10 to 12 excellent leads a year. It's not still the major portion of my lead generation, but that 10 to 12 are the right investors, people who are looking to build portfolios and are willing to listen to you because from the very onset, they resonated with your social media posts. And that's excellent for me, 10 to 12 very solid leads. So my advice to people on social media, again, is not to jump on and not to start calling yourself the guru unless you're actually an expert, because people see right through that. And maybe you'll end up with a lot of followers, but I really still do not understand what is the point of that if you're not attracting the right leads. I tend to stay away from my personal life on my social media. I'm just very focused on value delivery, excellent real estate content, attracting the right people, turning that into leads, turning that into success stories, and getting the referrals once they're on board. And I've been very blessed to have that really good lead generation for the last 3 or 4 years I've been, on Instagram.
I love that.
So I'm going to jump off of that and ask you a little bit off the cuff here. If there was 2 scenarios, so one scenario being, you've just graduated university, you've got a job, and you want to start kind of like how you started.
Yes.
You want to start investing in real estate. What would your advice be to them versus if you are somebody who are, say, in your 30s or 40s and you have equity in your home? What would the different strategies be for the new investor versus the people who have already bought their home and now they want to, say, prepare for their child's education, so on and so forth?
So just to get your question right, you have an X amount of equity. Should you save it for your kid's education or put it into real estate?
So what I was looking at is more so if, say, for example, they have a home and they've got equity in that home and they've got 200,000.
Yes.
What should they do?
Well,
Where should they put that?
select the right person to work with.
Okay.
I think that can be a complete game changer. Today, you have almost 80,000 real estate agents on Instagram. It's a job of its own to select the right person. And I think you have to start looking beyond what exactly are they doing on their Instagram, right? Are they selling fashion? Are they selling, what exactly are they doing, right? What kind of background are they from? And then sit down with, I think, at least 3 to 4 people as an interview. And I say that to people even when they come to my office. Like, I think it's a very good idea if you talk to 2 or 3 people to see who resonates, whose strategy you resonate with the most, right? Because if you resonate with my strategy, it'll be a very quick thing because I can then put a strategy together, look at for very focused properties. And typically I show 3 to 4 properties on an average to a buyer before they buy it. That's it. Wrap it up 3 to 4, because if you're not looking at this, then we have to step back and come to the office and change our strategy because I showed you exactly what we agreed with.
Mhm.
So to come back to your question, to select the right professionals to work with, talk to 2 or 3 people, then apportion your capital very intelligently. Think of risk before you think of return. Make sure that your bottom line is secured, your money is secured. Second advice, in Canada, it's extremely important to also understand your net numbers, which means you have to understand the taxation really, really well. And I learned this the hard way when I was just buying and buying and buying. And I was on a buying spree for the last 2016 to 2020, essentially. And I missed a lot of the tax angles. When I started getting into luxury home development and selling, I missed HST, I missed capital gains, or I'm going to become the principal residence of this property, and it doesn't work. You have to understand taxation. You have to work with the right person. You have to talk to a financial advisor and then decide, number one, is real estate for me? How much time do I have to apportion to this property that I've bought? Because freehold properties require a lot of maintenance. Short-term rentals require a lot of. So does it resonate with your lifestyle? Then decide, do I understand taxation completely? And then decide as exit strategy, which should be at least 5 to 7 years, that if I have a 5 to 7 year plan, do I have a clear exit strategy, which will give me that $200,000 that I've invested in back to me as at least 3 or 360? And does that make sense? Because I do have kids to educate.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were somebody that was just starting out today, is there, I know that you started in North York.
Yes.
So is there areas in the city that you have expanded to or beyond the city that you have expanded to?
Yes, I think it's extremely important for an investor to pivot when you see an area that you bought in has saturated. So my ultimate goal is at the time of acquisition, which is at the time of purchasing, I am buying properties that are in growth areas. Simply, like, is this area an area where growth is very much possible? When I started in 2010, I was in North York. At the time, bungalows were 500 to 700 there, 40 to 50 foot lots, right?
Mhm.
When that hit the 1.1 to 1.2 million mark, the 20% down cash flow break even wasn't working out. So I thought this area is now saturated because premium end users are starting to move into the area. Done. I moved to East End, which is East York, Upper Beaches. Houses there at the time were 600 to 800. I started buying up there and I started doing the same thing, buy a bungalow, turn it into a duplex. When the time is right, you build it and you flip it. But then those areas in 2018, 19 started hitting million one. I'm like, you know what? Cash flow is not making sense. Also, there's a lot of end users coming into this area. Time to move. Back now I went to the West End, which is Etobicoke. But fundamentally, I've kept distance to downtown almost similar, which is always under 30 minutes.
Mhm.
So today, majority of my portfolio has shifted into South Etobicoke,
Okay.
right? Where you can still buy an excellent bungalow between 900 to 1.1 million on a nice 40-foot lot that can be converted into a duplex,
Mhm.
right? After that, there's also pockets in Mississauga, such as Lakeview, such as, different areas where you're very close to the lake, you're close to the highways, you're close to TTC. All the fundamentals are very similar to what they were in North York, very similar to what they were in East York. But from a purchase price perspective, they're still undervalued.
Mhm.
So if somebody's starting with a budget of 900 to 1.1 million, or if they're less, find a joint venture partner up and buy something in that 900 to 1.1 million in the W06 or Lakeview area. If you're starting with an extremely low budget, start looking at good fundamental neighborhoods such as Peterborough, Guelph, Kingston. And find the right agent who's working there, who also is an investor, who also has the background of explaining you, who also has the knowledge and success stories to back it up, and who's giving you the options to select the right asset classes. So I think options are there. I think it's easy to just say, oh, everything's too expensive, I don't want to buy. I think there's still neighborhoods. I'm still buying stuff in good, like just in the peak of COVID, when everybody backed off, I purchased 5 houses, right? Because I knew like eventually, it was, for me, it was enough risk to double down because I was getting properties that were worth 1.2 to like $800,000. And I was just, because I'm like, you know what, people are still gonna need a place to live.
Mhm.
Just because of COVID, they're all gonna leave. It's an international problem. People still need place to live. And just like any other pandemic, I think I took a calculated risk to think that this will go away, right? I just didn't realize how much printing of the money the government's going to do and screw up the entire situation, and there's going to be inflation. But we did see a really good peak at 2021,
Mhm.
right? So I sold 3 properties in the peak and I bought 5 properties in the dip. So timing is very important, and that's where those professionals will guide you.
Mhm.
People say it's the time in real estate, not timing in real estate. I say timing is very important because it will expedite your success in real
Mhm.
estate. So
Mhm.
I absolutely look for timing. And also professionals that have enough to tell you when it's time to step back.
Mm.
In 2021, I was telling people I think it's too hot right now. I think there's too much government spending eventually. And that's where my, I guess, economics background comes helpful, where I'm like, if there's so much printing of money through COVID and interest rates are currently low and there's so much spending, eventually inflation will kick in and interest rates will go up. And that's probably a better time for you to buy.
Mm.
So now we're getting geared up to buy rather than 2021 or early 2022, right? So I actually was telling people that had the appetite to buy in 2021, markets was getting really heated. I'm like, this is not the time to buy. This is the time to wait. This is the time to sell if you've got something with lots of equity sitting on it.
Mhm.
So
Ah.
timing is very important, and working with the right professionals will help you guide, and your budget will just, the only thing that will be different is your locations. Fundamentally, you can still buy the same asset classes in different locations based on your budget. And if your budget is still too low, partner up, joint venture. I started with 100K when I started real estate, and without joint ventureship, I wouldn't have been where I am. So it's a smart way to invest.
You
Partner
have
up
to
with
start
somebody.
somewhere.
You have to start somewhere, and you have to start somewhere right. And finding, if you are doing the hard, like the way I also attracted a lot of joint ventures is like I used to take business plans to people. Like, this is the business plan. I've already done the research and I have half the money. I'm looking for the other half. This is a pitch for you to join me. So does that make sense? This is the exit strategy. This is the 5-year plan. If it doesn't make sense, on to the next investor, on to the next investor, on to the next investor. I was hustling in terms of like finding the people who were looking for joint ventureship, mitigating their risk, and doing a hands-off investment.
Who did you find was your first joint venture partners? Was it family and friends, or was it people that you had worked with and knew about you and your investing strategies?
The first investor I have, and he's still an excellent partner of mine, was 2014. I had a publication came out about me in Canadian Real Estate Wealth magazine.
Oh.
So they had, at the time, I think I had a $6 or $7 million portfolio, and they reached out to me. I met this person at a networking event. We were having this heated argument, and then she gave me a card. She's like, "By the way, I'm a reporter with Canadian Real Estate Wealth. I like your arguments. I want to do a small feature about you." The feature came out, and a doctor reached out to me.
Ah.
And that doctor said, "Look, I love your strategy. I love your portfolio. Do you partner with people?" I said, "In fact, I have an excellent property that I'm looking to buy. I'm short half the funds. If you want to go, we'll go together. We have a legal contract in place. Everything is very black and white." And he was one of the first people that I partnered with in 2015 in a property in South Etobicoke that we bought for 600 and we sold later at 1.4 million, and we only had to put in 60,000 each. Right. So we cashed out
Wow.
big time. That was the first
Amazing.
investor I had. So, but at the time, South Etobicoke bungalows were
How
600,000.
many years between buy and sell?
6.
6 years.
Yes.
Okay.
So bought in 2015, sold in 2021.
Amazing.
And bungalows doubled. And,
Yeah.
and this was like 3 or 4 houses from Lake Ontario, right? In South Etobicoke and like Mimico area.
You never mentioned Scarborough. What do you feel about Scarborough?
South Scarborough, Upper Beaches is part of Scarborough.
Right.
I've built there before.
Mhm.
That whole pocket between Victoria Park and Kingston, Warden and Kingston, I love that neighborhood.
Like Birchcliff and stuff.
Birchcliff and
Mhm.
Cliffside, exactly.
Mhm.
Even if you go a tad bit east, I can't
Mhm.
remember the name of that, but I had a house there as well. Viewbank, Northview, like those streets,
Closer to the
small
water.
little bungalows, 25 to 30 foot lot, but I
Mhm.
love the fact that it's near the water.
Yeah.
Water has been one of my biggest things from day one.
Oh.
Because any big city you see in the world, and I travel a lot, my family's all over the place. So for me, I like to travel and I like to see real estate and see what's going on. Pick any big city in the world: New York, New Jersey, Singapore, Bombay, anywhere you want. Luxury properties are always near the water. right? Or on the water.
Of course.
Everybody, and Canada is a very healthy lifestyle. People love to have Lake Ontario, summertime boating. It's becoming bigger and bigger. Our parks are getting more and more full by the
Mhm.
water. So I've always invested property near the water, and there's a lot of undervaluation in Toronto's waterfront properties or close to water properties, especially in the West End and areas like Lakeview and maybe not Oakville because they only contain mansions and those big ones, but
Mhm.
little lots, walk away from Lake Ontario, walk away from TTC, 15 minutes from downtown, freehold single family homes. You can't go wrong.
Totally.
I'm very excited to discuss how you got into development. But before we do, I know that we have a very good question in regards to a very very
Fun
good story.
investing
Yeah,
Very
you-
fun investing
well,
story.
We had you booked for the show, and then you brought out your swatter story, and I thought, oh, how relevant is this right now? Because there's like, I am literally obsessed with reading like case law on tenants and like being in Facebook groups and reading like the crazy things that people get themselves into. So watching your story, I was like, oh my God, so many people want to go in and take their homes back. How did you one feel comfortable enough doing that and not and knowing that you're not going to, get into more trouble? Because I've heard
Yeah.
like some real horror stories.
And
First,
also, how
though-
did you get there?
I was
Yeah.
going to say, can we share the actual
Oh, yeah,
story though?
the
Because
swatter.
some of our listeners may not have heard what the squatter story is all about.
And how did you not fear for your life? That's my other one for you.
Well, I am very thick skinned, right?
Okay.
So I'm also like, when it comes down to real estate, I'm extremely passionate. But at the same time, as an investor,
Mhm.
you've got lots of upsides,
Mhm.
right? Wealth creation, asset creation, you've got an amazing portfolio, you get people attracted to you, but there are downsides. And the stuff I don't enjoy is property management,
Mm.
right? With 17 properties and 34 doors comes 42 tenants that I manage under my belt, have been managing without an assistant, first on my own. Every day, I dedicate 2 to 3 hours to like these nonstop tenant problems. Over the span of last 13 years of investing, I have seen, especially in the recent government, how there's such a one-sided system between tenants and landlord, right?
Mhm.
The landlord and tenant board is 100% a one-sided board,
Mhm.
right? And reason why it's very political is obvious answer is that there's more tenant voters than there's landlords. There is a huge perception and misconception that landlords are bad people and landlords are greedy people. But what people are missing here is that landlords are the ones that are putting their hard-earned money into purchasing a property, potentially one property, converting it into 2 units, hence shortening the gap between supply and demand by creating livable units and then giving that home to tenants.
Mhm.
But for some reason, this bad perception is just going even worse.
Mhm.
And there is nothing in our government anybody is doing about it.
No.
In fact, it's gotten so bad now that obviously tenants have caught on to the fact that they can go longer and longer. And I think COVID also made it worse because evictions were delayed and evictions obviously. So I think there was a lot of knowledge about the bad system in our city that was brought in. And tenants are taking advantage of it. And it has gotten way worse in the last 4 years.
Mm.
So it's a very dangerous thing for as a landlord to be in because any tenant can take advantage of your home at any given point and there's no protection.
Mhm.
You can put as many laws as you want on the paper, but who's enforcing the laws? There's no enforcement of that law, right? Like a law says that a tenant is supposed to pay rent. So if the tenant rent is not paid, but who's enforcing it? And who has the financial ability with these high mortgage rates, property taxes, ever increasing property taxes, to go and manage no rental for 8 to 10 months, which is typically the time where an eviction takes place.
Mhm.
So I have learned to adapt by different methods. Sometimes where you have to take matters into your own control because no one else is there to help you.
For sure.
So brings me to this story, which was completely went viral on the internet. My inbox was flooded, and I have had situations where tenants have taken advantage. I had to pay tenants off or whatever the case. And I've always shrugged it off like problem resolved and I don't want to like make it worse. But this problem was so bad that I thought that, you know what, this has to be exposed. And even if it opens me up to a little element of risk, hate, or any kind of like bashing on the internet, I'm going to go ahead and make this video. Right. And you saw like we put a lot of work into the production of that video because I wanted people to relate to it. I wanted people to see the other dark side of it. And I wanted people to understand or at least bring out some level of empathy and action towards landlords.
Mhm.
So bought these two properties. The idea was to have these two properties next to each other, and I've actually applied for a severance of rezoning it into 4 properties. So 2 properties next to each other. We got the approval to split it into 4 lots. Beautiful property, minutes to the lake in South Etobicoke, and did really well in terms of the severance. But if you're developing the property, you're obviously not going to go and put money into the property. So I said, it's an older property. It's a well-functioning property. I'm going to rent it to Humber Students, which is down the street at Lumber Lakeshore. Students rented the property. They invited a guest. This guest was one of the friends of the tenant, but then decided not to leave. He got really violent. Guy had mental issues, whatever the case is. And if you see the video, my attack was to explain the story, but not personally on that guy, because I can't comment on what his life is, what his mental stability is, or what exactly his point is. Somebody's taken over my house. He's creating, in my opinion, a crime by violently kicking out the actual tenants who were on the lease out of the house. When I went to confront him, he was extremely aggressive. He had weapons in his hand, and he essentially just told me, this is my house now, so I'm not going to leave. He's not on the lease. So I'm like, of course, I'll call the cops. You're trespassing. I called the cops. Cops actually came to the house. They told me to wait on the street, went and spoke to the tenant. I guess tenant just made up a story that he's been living there. And that's enough for cops to just turn around and not do their job and say, we're not going to help you with this. This is a landlord and tenant matter. I brought up the fact that the guy has weapons. They said, well, just because having weapons doesn't mean he's going to use the weapons. I was shocked. I'm like, okay, so I guess cops are a write-off. Went to the landlord and tenant board, filed for eviction and all that. And I wasn't prepared to wait 8 to 10 months. I'm not stupid. I'm not going to sit here and lose $40,000-$50,000 plus have all this aggravation of this guy blatantly damaging my property, smashed up my kitchen. There were writings all over the walls. I wasn't having that. So I decided I'm going to take matters into my own hand. If this is going to go to court, I'm willing to defend myself. But why should I be the one to evict? Why should I be the one to wait to take him to court? He can take me to court. I'll wait for him to leave and I'll board up the house. That's what I did. We waited. He left. We boarded up the house. We threw his stuff out. I gave him all the local notices, and I had a lawyer in the background making sure I'm covered legally as much as I could. I tried talking to him reasonably. I wrote a million emails. There is no protection. And that's very sad. How do you want to, how as a government or how as people with logic want to solve a problem of supply if you're going to kill it by the root by discouraging people to own properties and rent them out? It's so stupid.
Yeah.
It is becoming more and more of a common conversation that we work with, investors as well, and our investors ourselves,
Everybody's
that
got
they
that
don't want to
question.
invest in Ontario anymore because of the laws. They just can't take that risk with their hard-earned money and their investments. And there's people who moved out of their own home and can't get back into it, and they've been leasing on their own, and someone's just taken over, and they can no longer afford their mortgage, and their home's taken. It's
And that's a
scary.
risk. With the interest of not overselling to investors, I make that disclaimer as part of my pitches very clear now. If you don't have the bandwidth to take risk to manage tenants in a very one-sided system, this is not the investment for you. Go and buy something else, because with real estate comes the risk of dealing with a one-sided system of tenants, which I'm hoping somebody would resolve very soon. I think, economically and macroeconomically, interest rates will always fluctuate. Inflation, these are all economic problems. But if you're going to discourage landlords to go ahead and own properties and rent their properties, and then forcefully make them rent through scaring them with vacancy tax, this is not an environment you're going to create to solve a supply problem. And this supply issue is not just starting to creep up even more from a landlord perspective who are not willing to buy homes anymore, also from developers who are tired of paying taxes, who are tired of dealing with the bureaucracies at the city level to go and get plans approved. And why should they do it? Right? I'm a developer and I know how much fees you have to pay and how much bullshit you have to deal with, not just from the bureaucratic city level and the red tape that's coming from there, but the neighborhood associations and the parks and forestry. You're going to get into a very dark space when nobody wants to develop.
For sure.
Right? So this is why I think that there is a serious reform needed for things that are at least somewhat in our control, above and beyond the economic problems of, sure, nobody wants to get into whether or not COVID was handled properly. A lot of countries are screwed. So I guess everybody handled it poorly. But what you can do is create a better business environment for people like landlords and developers, or you're not going to solve the supply issue. Not going to happen.
No, I can't see how they're going to solve it
No.
at this point. No.
I
A lot of
think-
people
You're
have-
only going to get those pre-construction big guys, right? That's it.
Mhm.
Tridel
I
has
have to
the
ask, did anybody hate on your squatter story?
tons.
Always.
Tons. Like,
Really?
not just that. Like, I had a CBC coverage and a Toronto Star coverage of like, hey, this guy owns 17 homes. He's a first generation immigrant, came from nothing. You know, you have these hate messages constantly coming. You're greedy, you're a house hoarder, you're this, you're that. And I shrug it off because for me, it's like, okay, buddy, like it is what it is, right? Like I know where I am. And as long as you're true to yourself, for some reason, I don't even have to put an effort. It just doesn't bother me.
So
Right?
you're
So
an economic
CBC
success story, as far as I'm concerned, to be new to the country and to be able to build up that kind of portfolio without having, the same background that anyone else who's actually born here and come out of it and be successful. You are a success story. And I have to agree with you. Like, shame on the government for wanting to provide all of this housing. And yeah, we have to build more homes and do all of this stuff. And yet their scale of treatment towards
Developer.
landlords and developers in
The
comparison to
worst.
tenants who I mean, everybody has to have a place to live,
Yeah.
but it's just when it's so blatantly wrong, which is the case, and as far as I'm concerned, in the squatter story, there has to be reform. And I am the
Yes.
first person to sign the petition. Should you go ahead and put anything forward?
If I
And
ever
I-
find a minute in my day, I'll prepare one. But look, I can come and speak.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actions, this is just I just have very little hope that where is it going? Because you also have to have the right government on the other side listening,
Mhm.
right? So again, I'm not getting into a political discussion, but at the same time, there has to be reforms. And if you actually want to resolve the problem by the roots, this is the cause. And people don't see the 17 homes. Yes, I don't go live in every single 17 house. I have a mortgage in every single 17 house. What I actually did was create 34 units out of it for
Mhm.
houses that were unlivable.
Mhm.
But I don't bother explaining because it's just you're talking to dead beats, right? So I say we move on, and that's it.
So
Mhm.
based off of this and essentially what you're talking about, so many other investors feel the exact same way. I love Toronto for the appreciation just as well as you do, but has this changed your investment thesis in any capacity? And do you want to eventually go out of province or do anything of that nature?
I don't want to call myself lazy, but I like being extremely efficient. And if with efficiency, what I mean is economies of scale, right? When you do something like, for example, if I built one house at a time, I realized the inefficiency of building one house at a time because you're still spending the same amount of money or same amount of time building one house or two houses in tandem.
Mhm.
So economies of scales and efficiency is very important for me, which means my office is 5 minutes from where I live. And my investment properties are within 7 minute radius of 3 development projects, which is usually the minimum amount of homes that I will be building, or I'll wait till I have 3 or 5 homes minimum that I'm building at the same time. Because you're dedicating that portion of your day to development, you're going site to site to site, you're finishing, and then you're creating that economies of scale. Moving out of province, I'm sure there are some good business models. I'm sure there's better taxation laws. It doesn't suit me personally because I think I can still create and squeeze value out of Toronto. I think Toronto still has a lot of potential. But there is a little bit of hesitation in terms of like, I am worried about, I think it's also important to protect what you have versus just focusing on growth. And I'm at the stage of my life doing this 13, 14 years. I've got a good thing going. I'm scared to double down and take extra risk in an environment where there is that negativity in terms of like, developers and landlords. I'm scared to grow more. I'm more concerned about protecting what I have. And that takes up a lot more of my day, right?
Mhm.
So I don't think I have the bandwidth to step out. I have a lot going on within the city, and I still think Toronto has a lot of. I see value in places where people have never seen, and I still see value in places where I'm like, how come no one else is looking at this, right?
Mhm.
But that is the game.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You see value where no one else is seeing, and I still see a lot of value in Toronto, which is why I don't see the need to step out, and I don't feel the need to make the effort to go and learn another business model somewhere else when I know exactly how to do it in my backyard.
I
Love
think
that.
before we
Beautiful.
wrap up, that's the perfect place to jump off really quickly just to get into you have become a developer, and that is a big part of your life and your business and what you do now. Was that just a portion of your investing transitioning into choosing to develop properties because you saw the value there?
Very good question. So investment was mainly a primary thing. Like I want to create a lot of inventory, right?
Mhm.
I want to buy houses because buying houses, I see the growth in these houses. But then what happened was all these properties that I had in North York and East York, when they did reach that saturation point where I'm like, I don't see any further growth. So I think it's either time to sell it or it's what do I do with it?
Mm.
At that time, when I sold one or two properties to a developer who was still buying it at the high prices, putting the money in and then reselling it, when that came to my knowledge, I'm like, man, I should be doing that.
Right.
Right. And that's how you kind of like zone into development. Also, I feel like out of all the things that I do, which is property management, selling, working with investors, I think development is the most fun for me.
Mm.
I'm so passionate about design. I'm so passionate about looking at a thing, going from a bungalow to like a beautiful luxury home, $3-4 million house. Right now, I'm working on a house which is, valuation should be close to 8 million when it's done. So, like, just to work with designers, bring design into it, energy efficiency into it, that is a huge passion of mine. So it was again a natural transition into
Mhm.
being a development. And if you understand zoning, and if you have the right team, and if you have thick skin, and if you have the ability to jump all the hoops of bureaucracy and all the bullshit, you can make a lot of money in development and you can do it very well. And especially if you've got economies of scale, you're doing multiple projects at the same time, right?
Mhm.
So real estate sales continues to being like selective clients, work with the good clients, create a good referral network of agents where certain clients where you can't help, they deserve the best. So you refer them to good agents, keep that as a funnel of income. That income goes into investment properties. That investment property turns into equity growth. That equity growth goes into development, turns into a bigger pie, and it kind of just
What a
cycles.
beautiful
This
cycle
is
you have.
it.
Incredible. I love
It's
that.
just- I
It
love
just
that.
it's very hand in hand, right?
Mhm.
And then you take all that value and you give it back to your clients because I build homes now.
Mhm.
So when I go sell $3-4 million houses, I can literally have an X-ray vision through like, oh, this is copper wiring. Oh, this is,
Mhm.
200 amp. Oh, they have this. So I can almost give that value back to these clients. They're like, wow, you know a lot about luxury homes. I'm like, damn right. Like I can tell you if that trim is $5 a square foot or $15 a square foot. I can almost get better at becoming a luxury agent.
And I know you'd
So-
mentioned that luxury was kind of always your niche alongside the investors. And obviously, you're doing $8 million projects now. Your first development, what was that?
Very difficult. The time span was supposed to be 1 year to finish. We ended up finishing in 2.5 years.
Wow.
Switched between two contractors. Again, I'm doing something which I have absolutely zero knowledge of.
Mhm.
Like first time doing a house that ended up selling for 2.5 million. It was right at Yonge and Finch area, like Connaught Avenue, and it was a struggle. But what worked in my favor was that delay was in that 2016. So each month I was delayed. I was going crazy, but property values were also like trickling up and up and up. So something that I was planning to sell for 2 million ended up selling for 2.5 million. So it kind of worked out the
Wow.
delays, but a lot of aggravation, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of risk, a lot of learning, a lot of mistakes. And as long as you're not doing them twice, you're okay, right?
Mhm.
And just to jump off of that, for new developers looking to get into the space, did you have a partner that was Tyrion certified, or did you become Tyrion certified? How did you go about becoming?
I literally, no, I did not have a contractor that was Tyrion certified. He was far from it.
Mhm.
Again, this was when I was 26, 27 years old.
Very different.
I was looking for, hey, who's going to build this for the cheapest price?
Mhm.
All the wrong things that you can think of that went into a development project as my first project, I did it. So, no, I made a lot of mistakes, and therefore I have the vision now to not make those same mistakes now, right?
Mhm.
Where you understand that cheapest guy is always not the best. And, people say quotes. I have stories for my mistakes. Like, and that's my rule book, right? Like, that's my guidance book where I just like, okay, what have I done in the past that has been wrong? Open that book. Don't make that mistake again. So
Mhm.
first project, like I said, it was a lot of mistakes. We just pushed through it. And I remember there were days where I was like, I was earning a commission check, all that commission checks going into payments, commission check payments. So it had that fire to like just go and keep closing too. Therefore, I was knocking doors and doing everything. I'm like, I've got to close X amount of money by the end of the year to be able to pay my construction guys. No partner, nothing. This was 100% a house that I bought for 700. I decided to spend $1 million to build it. 1.7 was my cost and sell it for 2 million. Therefore, make the 300K profit. But ended up selling for 2.5, and I did really well. And
Mm.
again, that pushed me into like, okay, I'm going to do this the second time now, do it right. Again, a few mistakes. That was in Upper Beaches, and those mistakes you just get better and better at it. And now I
Mhm.
feel a lot more confident. Right team, right architects, right planners, right designers.
All that
So-
matters. The team is like
Oh,
so
100%.
important. Like
Yeah.
when you have a solid team, it's
You
the
still
best.
have roadblocks, but you've
Mhm.
got guys again with the right intention. Should
Mhm.
hire guys for intention, right? Who are in it for the right thing. And now you attract the right people too because they see the future with you and you talk to them, you sit them down, you treat them with respect, you treat your trades with respect,
Mhm.
and you get good results. So developments, again, given the environment stays good for a developer to exist based on these hard tax laws and all this stuff, I wish to continue growing in it.
That's
Love that.
awesome. And I
Mhm.
think that leads us to our rare roundup before we close out
Mhm.
for today. So we just have 3 fun questions for you.
Yeah.
So number 1, I mean, we kind of touched on the neighborhoods you like to invest in, but what's your favorite GTA neighborhood in general?
I really, really like Sunny Lee and South Kingsway.
Okay.
I think it's a beautiful neighborhood. Love the trees, love the environment, love the nature in that neighborhood. Love the proximity to downtown. Love the proximity to Bloor Street. It's the perfect balance of a neighborhood, which is really nice, and it can house some really like it's got some beautiful, beautiful character properties where you also have those historic homes and stuff.
Love that.
That.
And then clearly you are extremely busy with all of this on the go. What is your go-to fast food in the car on the road?
Burger Priest.
Oh, classy. I like that.
nice.
We've had a lot of
Yes.
McDonald's, which I don't hate on, but
No,
I like
I'll
that.
make a pit stop at Burger Priest, but keep in mind I'm
And
very
you get out and you go and it's like, oh,
oh
what
yeah,
an
just
what an
quick burger
ordeal.
at Burger Priest is like usually always craves the satisfaction. I used to have this thing where the day I close a deal, I go eat Burger Priest.
Nice.
I love that.
That's
Love a good
awesome.
ritual. And then our final question is, what do you think makes a rare agent, someone that's unique and special and stands out in this industry?
I think intention is huge, right? Intention, which ultimately leads to empathy towards people you're dealing with. I think like no shortcuts is another really good one where if you're in it for the right intention and you in it for the right kind of like empathetic way towards your client, I think you're going to provide some excellent value to them and it's going to come back in a really good way. So don't look for shortcuts. Don't sell things that are just easy to sell, such as pre-construction,
Mhm.
and don't just do it for the commission, right? Because we all need to earn. It's a competitive industry, but believe me, in the long term, you create a good name for yourself, and you don't have to work too hard for leads. So that's what makes a rare agent, I think.
Awesome.
Thank
Well,
you so
thank you so much
much.
for joining us today. We got a lot of value out of you. We could definitely talk
So
for
much
days.
value.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
To all of our listeners and viewers, please throw us a little
I think you're gonna be
5-star
my
thumbs
investing
up.
agent.
Yeah.
All that good
Done.
stuff. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks.